One of the most frequent questions I've encountered during 15 years of pastoral ministry has to do with the question of life after death. What happens to a person after they die? Does their spirit or soul go to heaven? And how does that relate to the resurrection of the body? What's the difference between a disembodied heavenly spirit and a glorified resurrected body? The main thing to see is that the New Testament consistently describes and anticipates a two-stage life after death experience. One of the best ways to see how this shows up is in Paul's letter to the Philippians, where he talks both about the first stage, going to heaven when you die, and the second stage, after that, the resurrection of the body. Both of those show up in Paul's letter to the Philippians. Take, for example, Philippians chapter 1, verse 23, where Paul is anticipating his death. He's in prison. He's writing this letter from prison. He's anticipating his death, and he writes to the Philippians to say to them that if he dies, it's a matter of gain. He is departing, he says, to be with Christ, which is far better, in Philippians 1:23. Now, what's funny is he presumes that because it's better for the Philippians for him to continue living, he expects that he'll be released and continue with his ministry. Point for us is that Paul expects, if he is put to death by the authorities, that he will enter into an experience of the presence of Jesus. So note the timing of this. The timing of this happens for Paul upon his death. It's also for Paul a conscious experience. He expects it to be better than the present life. And the present life for Paul is presently marked by suffering. He's in prison. Surely the presence of Jesus and proximity to Jesus is better than suffering in a Roman prison. So stage one, call it perhaps going to heaven when you die, but for Paul is a conscious entrance into the presence of Jesus. Systematic theology, Christian theology, has historically called this the intermediate state. And that language of intermediate emphasizes that this is not the final Christian hope, even though, and I've encountered this pretty frequently, a lot of believers, faithful folks, pretty much think in terms of going to heaven when you die, or the intermediate state, as the sum and substance of the Christian hope. But there's another stage of hope after going to heaven when you die, and that shows up in Philippians chapter 3, verse 21. Stage 1, Philippians 1:23, my desire is to depart and be with Christ. Stage 2, Philippians 3:21, Paul says that when Christ returns, he will transform our humble bodies to be like his glorious body. So note again the timing of this event. Paul puts this bodily transformation, this resurrection of the body, at the second coming of Jesus, right? So for him, stage 1 of life after death commences at death in its conscious disembodied presence with Jesus. Stage 2 commences afterwards, after an indeterminate period of time, when Jesus returns. And when he returns, he will raise the bodies of his people from the dead. Now, Paul doesn't go into detail here about what that resurrection transformation looks like. He does talk about it in other places, and I would encourage you to read 1 Corinthians 15 to get a full sense of what Paul thinks resurrection of the body will be like. Two ways to talk about it come with the concepts of corruption and mortality. So Paul expects the resurrection body to be free from corruption. So sin and all of the entanglements of our hearts with sin, we're going to be free from that, free from temptation, and free from all of the detrimental effects of sin on our life and on our minds, our emotions, our wills. All of those things are going to be free from corruption. He also talks about freedom from mortality, or entrance into immortality. Notice Paul doesn't use the language of immortality with regard to the soul going to heaven. he uses the language of immortality with regard to the resurrected body. So our bodies, when Christ comes, will be raised and given the gift of immortality. Death will not be an issue anymore. So you may be asking, does it really matter? What's the point? Why does it matter? And it matters because it has to do with how we think about Christian hope. Let's realize that stage one, dying and going to be with Jesus, is not the way the Bible talks about life. It's not what it means to overcome death. To die and go to heaven means you are simply dead, to quote or allude to a well-known theologian. That death needs to give way to something else, and the thing that it gives way to is the resurrection of the body. Resurrection of the body is the Christian doctrine that comprises our hope. It's the doctrine that says we'll see our loved ones again, that we'll feel their embrace, that they will have bodies, we will have bodies, we'll hear their voices, we'll see them with our eyes, immortal, incorruptible eyes, we'll hear their voices, we'll feel their embrace, we'll be full, real, embodied human beings inhabiting God's new creation in relationship with Jesus and with one another. That richness, that robust vision of the future, that's what it means when the Bible talks about our hope. That's what we mean when we as Christians talk about our hope. So if we're talking about the relationship between disembodied spirits and resurrected bodies, it's not an either or, but it is important to get things in order and to understand that hope is ultimately about the resurrection of the body. So when we talk about where our loved ones are at the present time, then we want to say that they've died, they've gone to be with Jesus, they're consciously present with the Lord. But they, like we, are waiting for something. And the thing they are waiting for, the thing they are hoping for, the thing we are hoping for is the resurrection of the body.